is Real, a podcast about the Beatles. My name is Jason Carty.
My name's Stephen Cockcroft.
And we're live on tape from Dublin and Belfast. And this is the third part of our triple podcast about that great triple album, All Things Must Pass. And we've already looked at George Harrison's road to his starting work on the album in May 1970. We focused in on the big hit song, My Sweet Lord. And today we're going to pick up the album, give it a shake and see what falls out. It's a Herculean task, isn't it, Stephen?
It is, but it's an enjoyable task, and it's what we've been waiting for across 3 whole series.
It's all been leading to this moment, and you know, like they say, when you're eating an elephant, you just have to take it one bite at a time. So
is that what they say?
That is a very famous phrase. So let's eat the elephant that is All Things Must Pass. And we're going to look at the individual component parts of the album. It's curious that we don't really have a Mark Lewison type overview of the structure of what happened. We know that he did his demos for Phil in May 1970. They recorded till about October 1970. The album comes out at the end of November. But we don't really have a strict chronology of events. Sure we don't.
No. We have lots of anecdotal evidence. So the various players that have been there, Eric Clapton, Peter Frampton, Bobby Whitlock, they've all, in their various memoirs and autobiographies, touch on the sessions and give a little insight. The closest that you might get to a chronology is looking at the tracks that feature the heavy hand of Phil Spector, because he sort of drifts in and out of the project, and we know that sort of towards the end of the recording session he was in New York and sending notes back to George, and George took over the production. So I suppose as a rule of thumb, you could say that the heavier wall of sound tracks probably come at the beginning of the sessions. So
yeah. So I think no better place to start then is to, obvious is you take out the album, and the first record you take out and put on is Applejam, the third record in the box set that is All Things Must Pass. So
that's what I do.
So
no, I don't.
The Applejam is, I have to say, from my point of view, it is my most unlistened part of All Things Must Pass. And people talk about it being this mighty, mighty triple album. But there's a large chorus of people who may not listen to 33% of this triple album. That Applejam is the most unplayed part. You believe it's maligned, Stephen?
Sometimes I don't even know who you are.
Are you saying side 6 gets as much airtime in your house as side 1?
Perhaps not as much, but it does get played. But then we established, several episodes ago, or possibly right at the beginning of this podcast escapade, that you don't like the band, you don't like Delaney and Bonnie, you don't like that authentic, you like pop stuff. Yeah, so I can see
blues-based noodling isn't my
doesn't float your boat.
It's not my main bag, It's but.
I suppose the thing for me is the Eric Clapton, Derek and the Dominoes connection, because that, kind of growing up, that Layla album was such a kind of just influential album. It was like at school you had, before punk hit, that was one of the albums that everybody had. It was just that kind of southern rock with Clapton and Bobby Whitlock, and this, the Applejam, two sides sort of feed into that feel and those musicians, and I suppose I do have a bit of a soft spot.
No, that's fair enough. And Applejam is, it's a third disc. It's 29 minutes long. It's 4 main jam tracks and a 5th track of It's Johnny's Birthday, which has popped up before on an episode because George recorded that for John Lennon's birthday.
Yes.
And very sweetly this year, I don't know if you saw this, the George Harrison estate put out a little animation on John Lennon's 80th birthday.
I saw that.
Animated to It's Johnny's Birthday. So that was very sweet. But each Applejam comes from a different group, doesn't it? So it's not all Derek and the Dominoes. They're just on one of them, aren't they?
Yes, this is it's sort of a collection of different, we talked about the different sort of configurations of the 2 main core bands, and then you had players drifting in and out, and one of these jams features Ginger Baker, who, to the best of my knowledge, does not feature on the main album. So you've got Dave Mason, Klaus Voormann, Derek and the Dominoes. All of these people are drifting in and out, and this is a collection and sort of a representative selection of the various players. And Klaus Voormann makes the point, there was no pressure, there was no time pressure. They had time to do this. Somebody would just start playing something, and they'd all sort of join in, and it's fantastically well recorded. It's as well recorded as anything else on the album, and hopefully the box set is going to have another hour and a half of this.
Hopefully. Well, it is very well recorded, and we don't know yet exactly, this 29 minutes that we have on the album, we don't know how much more of it there is. And I think, I'm right in saying in the original album, it didn't have, I think it was all credited to George Harrison in terms of writing. And it seems in the 2001 reissue, it's all credited to the actual individual players. I was looking at the sleeve notes to the 2001 issue today, and it seems to have an individual breakdown that isn't there on the first one. But yeah, Applejam is, I slag it off, and I'm saying, is it unlistened to, or is it unnecessary? I've gone back to it again I've probably listened to it more in preparation for this than I have in the last 30 odd years. And the thing that struck me about it is that it's, even if you don't listen to it a lot, it's what it represents. And it represents very specifically something that George could do that John and Paul could not do. Yeah. And something that we've come back to particularly talking about McCartney album and this album, is how people approach it and the filters that they come through. And, McCartney's album, comes as a surprise and comes in the breakup, whereas George's album is preceded by My Sweet Lord. It's this gateway song. And then you're looking at this package and you listen to these two fantastic records full of songs, and you get the third record, and it's this jam. And we know how bad a Beatles jam sounds. We've got tapes from January 1969. And this was something, again, George has proven something in the first two discs. And then the third disc, he's proving another thing, almost to say, and I can play guitar, and I can jam, and,
Yes, that really hadn't occurred to me until you sort of outlined that theory that this is really him showing, look, I can do this and I can collaborate. I mean, what I would say is that George was always very candid about the fact that, he wasn't an Eric Clapton. He wasn't, that improvisation was, is not his style. He doesn't come from that blues tradition. And, all of the sort of stories that you hear about him in the studio, particularly sort of from Jeff Emmerich, are George very painstakingly working out the guitar part. It's not a case of he just goes in, turns up the amp and solos and improvises. So he is, I suppose, possibly the most out of place person in the room when these jams are starting. But yeah, he's there, and he's kind of holding his own. And interestingly, I know we want to talk for the next hour or so just about each individual track on Applejam, but it's interesting the points where he takes the lead and who is playing the guitar and who is sort of coming to the fore in each particular track. But yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we talked a lot in the first episode about the collaborative nature of what he was doing in the run-up to making the album, and this is just another perfect example. And these are musicians essentially playing for themselves, I think. Yeah.
So let's just quickly run through these tracks. And it depends on which year or which version of All Things Must Pass you're listening to as to what order you get the songs in. So the original order is, I Remember Jeep is the opening jam. Jeep is Eric Clapton's Dog. And this is the one that's got Ginger Baker, Klaus Voormann, Eric Clapton, George Harrison, and Billy Preston.
That's it.
That's a good mix.
And this is the one that I think you can also hear the Electronic Sound album.
Yeah, I didn't realize that those kind of electronic noises are from Electronic Sound, do you think?
I think so. I will hold my hand up and say I have not sat down to play Electronic Sound at the same time as I'm playing this. But it does seem to me that this is post-production.
Right.
Where Electronic Sound is being sort of faded up and faded in and out. And again, that's quite an innovative thing for the time.
Bit of self-sampling.
Yeah.
Thanks for the Pepperoni is Bobby Whitlock, Carl Rattle, Dave Mason, Eric Clapton, George Harrison, and Jim Gordon.
Yeah.
When and that's kind of a rollover Beethoven type style riff, classic rock and roll form.
It is, and the interesting thing about that track is Clapton is just in the background playing rhythm guitar, and it's George that starts off the track because, you know, rollover Beethoven, that's something he's comfortable with. He's on firm ground there. So his guitar is featured at the beginning, and then towards the end, or in the middle, it's Dave Mason, and then George comes back in at the end. So Clapton is just taking a kind of rhythm part there.
And then Plug Me In is essentially the same kind of Derek and the Dominoes collective again. So they're working, because don't Derek and the Dominoes initially work with Phil Spector? Isn't that what happens?
Yes. So that grouping that became Derek and the Dominoes first got together as sort of do sessions for a P.P. Arnold album, and then they're drafted in as one of the core bands for All Things Must Pass. And sort of a trade-off, Eric says to George, you know, we're here and we're working on your album. Can we use Phil Spector to produce something for us where we've sort of forming this band? And so they record 2 tracks, Tell the Truth and Roll It Over. And those are the first Derek and the Domino recordings, although Dave Mason and George Harrison appear on those.
Right.
If you were to get, for example, there's an album called The History of Eric Clapton. Tell the Truth is on that, and George gets credit as a rhythm guitar player. They're hard to find. These were produced by Phil Spector, released as a single, and then withdrawn because Clapton decided he didn't like the sound. But I think they turn up on compilations on the Clapton Crossroads. Tell the Truth is taken it. It ends up on Layla. Roll It Over, I think, doesn't make any other appearance. It's kind of X-rated lyrics. You should be warned.
Oh dear. Well, we won't be playing that here.
No.
And then you have It's Johnny's Birthday, which is just George, Mal Evans, and Eddie Klein. And well, we should talk about the songwriting credits for It's Johnny's Birthday.
Yes, George has just terrible form in the plagiarism stakes, but this is basically a lift on Congratulations by Sir Cliff Richard, and Cliff as he was then, which was a 1968 Eurovision Song Contest entry for the UK. Congratulations, it came second.
Yeah.
Produced by Norrie Paramore.
Oh, right.
George Martin's arch rival. But anyway, they just take that and they change the lyrics. And Phil Coulter and Bill Martin were the authors, and they had to, you know, file a claim in December 1970 against George for royalties. And as a result, all the subsequent pressings added them and basically said new lyrics by Mal Evans, George Harrison, and Eddie Klein.
Yeah, I remember when I got my first copy of All Things Must Pass in the late 80s, and I saw Phil Coulter's name on it. And if you're Irish, Phil Coulter has a very specific type of reference point, you know.
He plays the piano very well, but not very fast.
Yeah, well, in the 60s and 70s, he wrote these fantastic pop songs for Cliff Richard and the Bay City Rollers and all the rest. In the 1980s, he sort of reinvented himself as Ireland's Richard Clayderman type figure, where he would make this very Muzak-y type instrumental albums that were in the cars of mums up and down the country on tape.
Yeah.
And he made a packet for it. So when I got my All Things Must Pass, Classic Tranquility by Phil Coulter was the big hit album.
Yeah, my mum had that in her car.
Yeah, and so I kind of learnt the whole backstory of Phil Coulter through. I was like, oh, he's actually got he's you know.
He sat in a room with George Harrison, and you see that it creates a completely.
Well, I think he's an extraordinary talent, Phil Coulter, and he's written some amazing songs.
Can we talk briefly about Eddie Klein?
Oh yeah, go on.
So everyone knows who Mal Evans was, but Eddie Klein was the Apple Studios technical manager, and he worked on All Things Must Pass and Imagine. But he became Paul's go-to guy. He had a kind of backroom role on Wings Wildlife. He mixed London Town, mixed Back to the Egg. He was the one that set up the 16 track for McCartney 2, etc., etc.
Yeah, he pops up in McCartney 2. He plays a big role in that. He's in the archive edition.
But you think It's Johnny's Birthday must have been a nice little earner for him.
Yeah. And then the final track on Applejam is Out of the Blue, obviously inspiring Jeff Lynne a few years down the line. Well,
we can't blame George for that, I'm afraid. I'm not prepared. This is a track that it's just completely made up. And again, interesting, who's playing the guitar on this?
It's
George
Klaus Voormann, isn't it?
and Klaus Voormann.
Yeah.
And it has that, if you know the Stone song, Can't You Hear Me Knocking?
Yeah.
There's a kind of extended, slightly jazzy coda to that. And this reminds me very much of that. So
that's Applejam. And so, maybe it's not your most listened to disc out of your triple All Things Must Pass vinyl, but, Stephen doesn't really have any truck with the Applejam bashing.
I think I think it's an integral part of the package. And there was a webinar just at the end of last week, where Olivia Harrison was on talking about sort of the reissue, and people were trying to get information out of her. And she said, "Oh, there's lots and lots of tapes." And somebody said, "Well, will there be outtakes and demos?" And she said, "Lots of demos, lots of alternative versions, and lots of jams. So expect more Applejam."
More Applejam. Well, it's I'm glad it's there. I think it is, as you say, an integral part of things. In 21st century, it would have been the limited edition disc that came with the first 10,000 copies, and it would have been forgotten about, and we'd think about things differently. But it is interesting in the CD afterlife of All Things Must Pass. In the first CD reissue, it's the second disc. They crammed the first two records onto the first disc. And then in the 21st century All Things Must Pass CD, it's crammed on the end of disc 2. So there's loads of it's treated as bonus tracks on the 2001 CD in a way, which I don't really like.
It does sort of appear, it's like they will maybe come on to this, but they sort of stick the new bonus tracks on the end of disc 1 and split the thing up, and it's a bit odd the way they approach that. But I think Applejam, it sort of gives you an insight into the sessions, and if you have any interest in, and I know you don't, in Derek and the Dominoes, Bobby Whitlock, Delaney and Bonnie, that whole kind of early 1970, 71, 72 style of music. And, Layla as an album, Derek and the Dominoes, not successful when it was released. So even at the time, but with hindsight, this is the origins story of that band,
So let's get onto the main part of the show. All Things Must Pass, the first two albums, side 1, track 1. And again, we're coming back to this notion of how this album is interpreted. There's a number of big brassy songs that the album could have opened with, are big noisy Spectre productions, but instead it's a very sweet, subtle opener with I'd Have You Anytime. And it's always interesting to see the statement of intent by putting a song like that up front.
I think this is more to do with the authorship of the song than the sound of the song. It is a very low key start to what is a big, big personal statement of an album. And I think this is George basically announcing to everybody, I am writing with Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
He front and center, he puts him right. I am on the same level as Bob Dylan. Arguably, Dylan at that stage is the only kind of rock star bigger than the Beatles, bigger than Lennon and McCartney, and George is just making it clear. And a lot of this album, as you say, is about putting a lot of clear blue water between himself and the Beatles in terms of the sound, in terms of everything. And it's a Harrison Dylan co-write that opens the album.
Yeah, and you can't imagine Paul or John writing with Dylan like that.
No.
And, we've talked before about this kind of the place his head was at the start of 69, where he's had his first kind of significant interaction with Bob Dylan, and he's going to interact with him again throughout 1969 at the Isle of Wight. And the thing I was thinking about was it's interesting how a year earlier, at the start of 68, George is very much directing the Beatles in terms of the spirituality. He's driving the India stuff. He's driving the Transcendental Meditation. He's, they're going off to see the Maharishi. And a year later, he feels that he doesn't have any, he can't really inspire them to follow what he wants to do, if he indeed wants to do anything at the start of January 69. He's gone from a sense of control in some ways, or a sense of being involved
influence,
his influence is kind of totally different at the start of 69 compared to 68.
Yes, I think a lot of this. I mean, if you really want to kind of dig into the psychology of it, I think the sort of the fall from grace of the Maharishi um, plays a big part in that. That if you think about that song, "Not Guilty," he's sort of saying, not guilty for leading you astray on the road to Mandalay. That entire song is a kind of, don't blame me.
Yeah.
That this turned out to be a dead end. And, he goes to Woodstock, he hangs out with the band. We touched again on that sort of sense of camaraderie that he found there, that he was so admiring of. And you can hear him throughout the Get Back sessions, referring to the band and referring back to that. And he just can't get them there for various reasons. Paul's not interested.
Yeah.
The band, or Paul is the anti-band. John is kind of strung out and he's not interested. He's got other fish to fry. So there's a frustration.
And we know that it's a lifelong friendship between George and Bob Dylan. This is the first Traveling Wilburys collaboration in a way.
Yeah.
That they're there, but George, I know you kind of have this notion that he's kind of creating the 70s rock star template. This kind of collaborative, spiritual, early 70s rock star thing.
Yes. I mean, so although it's a solo statement, he's bringing in his heavy friends to help out, and they don't come bigger or heavier than Bob Dylan. And I think there is a degree of calculation about putting the Dylan song right front and center, first track, bang. He's basically declaring, I'm a good songwriter. I am on a level with Bob Dylan. And Dylan always treated him as an equal in a way that John and Paul didn't, because they knew him when he was 13, 14 years old. They grew up with him. He was just the kind of snotty kid.
But at that stage, Dylan wasn't collaborating with people either, really.
No,
he had the band as a vehicle, but he wasn't he wasn't known for an awful lot of co-writes in that way.
No, I mean, 68 was his kind of post-motorcycle accident and John Wesley Harding. And if you think about it, we touched on this, the influence of John Wesley Harding, post-Pepper, post-Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah.
The Beatles bought into that.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating that it is George is the one that was able to break through. Paul, I think, just has too much of a pop sensibility to really go after that Dylan thing. Lennon probably has too much of an ego.
Yeah, well, we have the Lennon, like everyone thought Lennon and Dylan were the matchup, and things like Eat the Document and all that stuff that happened in the 60s, that they were supposed to be the two who would hang out. And George and Bob make more sense, or they do better
I mean, you
work.
you can see Lennon and Dylan, particularly in 65, 66, kind of circling each other and being just wary of each other. And I think each of them at that stage has too much of an ego to get the best, or allow that kind of collaboration.
So the album kind of slinks open with I'd Have You Anytime. Track 2 on side 1 is My Sweet Lord. Should we do another hour on My Sweet Lord?
I think we could at least do another hour on My Sweet Lord.
There is more to be said on it. But you can pause now and go back and listen to last week's episode again if you want. And then side 1, track 3 is, and here's where the kind of that big All Things Must Pass thing kicks in. And it's, so, you could have put a big opener like Wah Wah up front, but they didn't. It's a build, and then here comes Wah Wah. And
you kind of get, it's like being hit by a cosh. You kind of get sandbagged by this track after the low key opening.
And as we progress through All Things Must Pass, I'm going to say that there are certain songs that could possibly have been done by the Beatles, but they weren't presented. And then there are songs that were absolutely rejected by the Beatles. And this one falls into the possible camp, because this is famously written in January 69.
Yes. So what George says, this is a direct quote. He says, "This was written during the Let It Be fiasco. I remember Paul and I were having an argument. The crew carried on filming and recording us. Anyway, after one of those very first mornings, I couldn't stand it. Wasn't fun. Wah Wah was a headache, as well as a
type of guitar pedal.
Yeah. It was written during the time in the film where John and Yoko were freaking out, screaming, I left the band, gone home, and I wrote this tune." So this is his expression of frustration of what was happening.
In fantasy Beatle land, it'd be great if when eventually he did walk back into the Get Back sessions, if he'd said, "Okay, you want me back? Here's my song," and he kicked into that riff, and Ringo would have gone in, and because it has that kind of "I've got a feeling" kind of arpeggiated riff vibe. It could have been in there.
It could have been. You think he should have said, right, this is my condition, is that we play this, that Paul sings the harmony, and we're going to do it we're going to open with it on the roof. Because basically, it's a song about Paul. It's a song about the Beatles. It's a song about his disillusionment.
Yeah.
There are other songs on the album that are more explicitly about Paul, but this was prompted by the argument with Paul, and it's just venting. And he's scathing in this song about the Beatle thing.
Yeah. What's to say? They're at the right time, cheaper than a dime, all those kind of lyrics.
Yeah, you made me such a big star. And remember, this is written well before John is writing I don't believe in Beatles. And this is the first song recorded for the album. And this is Phil Spector at his best, or I suppose at his worst, depending on your point of view. You've got George and Clapton and the three guitar players from Badfinger, Bobby Keys. It's huge. And I have to say, this is a song, an arrangement I don't much care for. I think this is overpowering when it hits you. I like the song. There are other better versions of it, but it is just overpowering, I find.
And we do have a version with Paul on it, which is the Concert for George version.
Yes.
And, you wonder, what did Paul think when it was playing? He probably thought nothing. He probably doesn't know.
But yeah, this is my fun fact. It was the first song recorded for All Things Must Pass. It was the first song played by George at the Concert for Bangladesh. And apart from Joe Brown's final song, it was the last sort of big ensemble song played at the Concert for George.
And it is a great version, that.
And I think the Concert for George version is great. The Bangladesh version is good. But I thought it was fascinating that Clapton put the song, he was the musical director, and I'm assuming that it was the big finale.
Yeah.
The big finale. You've heard something, you've heard While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Here Comes the Sun, and you're thinking, what are they going to end with? And then suddenly, wah.
But I think that, I know we've spoken about this before. I mean, I think the Concert for George is a fantastic recording, and George had this fantastic songbook, but in the live arena, he never got the road legs to figure out a decent set list, or where how to order or scan those things. So Clapton obviously would be rather skilled at that. So then we go on to side one, track 4, Isn't It a Pity? And this is a song, number 1, that's rejected by the Beatles. So it does appear in January '69, doesn't it?
It does, and
maybe before.
It may be before that, because you hear there is a conversation during the Get Back sessions where George is saying, recalls that John had vetoed Isn't It a Pity 3 years before. And if you go back, a couple of sources, if you look at Jeff Emmerich's book, which I obviously don't recommend, he says it was offered for inclusion on Sgt. Pepper. But Mark Lewison says it was actually presented the year before during the sessions for Revolver, which would tie in early '69 with George saying to John, you turned this down 3 years ago. And it's unbelievable that this was turned down by the Beatles in '66, never mind in '69, when they had a dearth of material in '69.
I mean, if that song was written in '66, which apparently it was, it's extraordinary. It comes from the same genetics as Long, 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 this kind of slow, soulful George song. So, you could definitely see it fitting into the White Album. It's really hard to imagine that its genesis goes back to the era of Taxman and Good Day Sunshine,
Yeah, it would be fascinating to sort of speculate or to hear what a Revolver era arrangement of that song would be like. And I mean, I've said this before, but it's an incredibly mature lyric.
Yeah.
To have been written, by somebody in his early 20s in '66. It's a very kind of non-judgmental commentary on a failing relationship. You
Yeah.
know, and it's generally taken by all of the critics and all of the commentators seem to think, well, it's a commentary on the disintegration of the Beatles. But if it was written in '66, that's not the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of nice things that have been written about the song. Rolling Stone said it's the music of mountaintops and vast horizons, which is a quote that I like a lot. That's a feeling you
Yeah,
get a lot from All Things Must Pass.
yeah,
This kind of,
yeah,
you think of cartoon George in Yellow Submarine kind of standing on the mountaintop with,
yeah,
everything
yeah.
kind of waving behind him. But it does have that kind of feeling. And again, there's a huge number of people playing on this. So it's got maybe the largest number. Because obviously, Isn't It a Pity appears in 2 versions.
It does. So he kind of combines the two core bands. So you've got Ringo and Klaus and Billy Preston and Eric and Eric Clapton and Bobby Whitlock and Gary Wright and you've got brass and strings and a male choir and Badfinger are there. So this is everybody is there. Possibly Morris Gibb is there from the Bee Gees. He claims to be playing piano on the songs, but given that there are possibly 4 keyboard players, who can tell?
And Peter Frampton has a big role in this. I know he's all over the album, but he's on this one in a big way, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Frampton is one of the sort of massed ranks of acoustic guitars, and he's got a new book, autobiography out, and he deals at some length with All Things Must Pass. He says he was involved in 5 of the basic tracks alongside Badfinger, and then he said he recounts that after the album was finished, George phoned him up and said, "Phil needs more guitars. Will you come back?" And he ends up sort of sitting on a stool side by side with George Harrison while they're kind of overdubbing acoustic guitars. And the book that he has out is really it's a fascinating read because he just suddenly is dropped into this world, and he's kind of suddenly hanging out with the Stones and the Beatles, and this is years before his sort of the heyday of his commercial success in the 70s. But so yeah, he's contributing to this. Possibly those overdub sessions, jams, maybe they exist somewhere.
We might get them yet.
Yeah.
And isn't it a pity, you could look at it 2 ways. Is it a song about the Beatles, where, we break each other's hearts, and isn't it a pity? Or has George said it's about Patty?
Yeah, there's. I turned up an interview that he and Eric did, which is slightly awkward interview where he and Eric are sitting side by side promoting the.
It's like it's done on a video camera or something.
Yeah,
it's a very strange kind of thing.
That's it. And this is in December '91 when he's in Japan, and they start talking about something and written by Patty, and George is being a little bit, oh well, not really, but I wrote other songs. And Eric says, what else? And he goes, isn't it a pity? So he, and if you look, it's the lines are, isn't it a pity, isn't it a shame how we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain, how we take each other's love without thinking anymore, forgetting to give back. And you can see, well, that could be about a relationship. And it did occur to me that perhaps the reason why it appears twice on the album is it bears those 2 separate meanings. Right. I would say maybe the second shorter version is more easily interpreted as the relationship one, but the big, particularly with that fade out.
Well, that fade out is, it's hilarious. It's first of all, the song, the first version is 7 minutes and 10 seconds long, which is 1 second longer, 1 second shorter. 1 second shorter than Hey Jude. And, but, you listen to that, fade out at the end, and it's Hey Jude in disguise. Hey Jude is just kind of hiding right under its skin.
Yes. And, it's a very famous bone of contention that it was the Hey Jude session that George effectively absented himself when Paul was saying, no, I don't want you to play the little guitar parts and save that for real love.
And it's, but it, the writer, Nicholas Schaffner said that the song is a towering simplicity, but the endlessly repetitive fade out somehow manages to be hypnotic instead of boring. And I'd agree with that. I'd be quite happy if it went on for another couple of minutes. I love Isn't It a Pity. It's a great piece.
And this appears on live in Japan.
Yep.
But at no point during the fade out does George say to the audience, "Just the boys,
just the girls,
just the girls,
everybody
over there." George doesn't do that. I think he missed a trick.
He did. There, but, he needs to work on that.
This was a hit single as well. So this was originally George had this earmarked down as the lead single, and then they went with My Sweet Lord.
But it was on the B side of My Sweet Lord.
Yeah, but in the US and Canada, it was a double A side and got to number 1 in Canada.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact. So that's Isn't It a Pity?
You sound so not interested in that.
No, it is interesting. I think I'm aware that, like many things, we tend to be UK and US chart centric. You know, but maybe there's an episode on the Beatles in Canada, isn't there?
There is. There certainly is.
There certainly is.
Piers Hemmingson, if he's
Piers
the Canadian expert. And can I say, check out the 11-minute version by Nina Simone.
Oh yes,
if you not when you're feeling depressed in any way.
So we get on to side 2, and side 2, track 1 opens. This is a real,
everybody's
favorite song. A real George Martin, let's kick the
Yeah.
album wide open, and a song that everyone should know, which is What Is Life. You can't not love What Is Life, can you?
This is a fantastic. This is a kind of we talked about Badge before on the episode. This seems to me in a direct line with Badge.
Yes.
This is one of those what Simon Lang, I got his name right, says it's a kind of new type of pop rock song, and it's a kind of soul Motowny feel, and you can't not imagine this song being played by the Beatles. This is really far away.
Yeah.
You're going to tell me you can see this dropping onto Abbey Road?
No, I can't. No, I can't. Although there is that on the CD, 2001 CD, there's the What Is Life. There's that backing track which has this Penny Lane piccolo trumpet all over it.
Yes,
which does sound terrible. I mean, that was a right decision to take that out.
It was the right decision. Yeah, it was the right decision. One of the things I really love about this, and it's really buried in the mix, is the string arrangement.
Yes.
I'm a sucker for a kind of fabulously punchy rhythmic string section, and this is one of John
You're going to love Yellow. Sorry.
I should really check that band out. That's the one thing I like about Yellow. That's not the one thing I like about Yellow. But from about 3 minutes 30, there is this great string section, and I think if Danny is listening, I'm sure he is. If you haven't quite finished that remix, just turn that string section up, fade the vocals out, and punch the strings up.
Yeah, and it was a top 10 hit in the US when it came out as the second proper full on single, and the video went up on YouTube about 2 years ago. New video for the song for some reason, not sure why, but
yeah,
it's there.
slightly odd video.
It's just a girl dancing around, isn't it?
Yeah, it was the second single released in America with Apple Scruffs on the B side, and that might be why it's listed as the third most popular George Harrison song by the listeners of AOL Radio. Number one is My Sweet Lord. Number 2, we should do this as a competition.
Well, if people want to guess, we've got nothing to give away.
Weirdly, it's Blow Away.
Yeah, you told me that fact, and I my first take was, AOL Radio, that makes no sense. That's like Great Western Railway Airlines or something. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to.
But obviously, your favorite version is the one by Weird Al Yankovic at George Fest in 2014.
Good old Weird Al. He really
move on. Let's just move on.
He really was trying to be utterly sincere when he performed that. It was great. I have no word against Weird Al. Seriously, I'll do half an hour on Weird Al if you're not. Careful.
I'm going to hit the edit button right now.
Side 2, track 2, and it's a visit again from Mr. Bob Dylan, and it's the song "If Not for You." And we should remind ourselves of the timeline, because this All Things Must Pass comes out at the end of November, but If Not For You would have already have been known at that point because it came out a couple of weeks earlier, at the start of October 1970, as the lead single from Dylan's New Morning album, Dylan's own version of it.
Yes.
So essentially, All Things Must Pass has a cover version on it.
Yep.
And this is a song that didn't Bob and George kind of record a version of this together.
They did. We talked about that May session, and they work on that. And that version came out on the Dylan bootleg series, the very first, that volumes 1 to 3.
Yeah.
And it's kind of okay. And I have to say the Dylan version on New Morning is okay.
I like New Morning. It's all right.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, I like those kind of early 70s Dylan crazy records. New Morning.
Not a bit bandy for you?
Well, Dylan is Dylan, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like Dylan. I'm a Dylan fan, but it's a kind of very laid back country romp, and this is I think a great example of what the production on All Things Must Pass does, which it just completely transforms that song into this fabulously kind of glittering pop song. The production just absolutely sparkles, and the guitars, and I think he absolutely knocks Dylan off the stage with this. I think
it is a lovely version.
I feel we've lost half our audience now. But
it is a lovely version, but there might be somebody else. You talk about the twinkling guitars there. Who might have been on guitar on this track?
Well, yeah, this is interesting. Alan White. People remember Alan White, the drummer of Yes, and was also on Instant Karma. And he gave an interview. I'm not saying how reliable or otherwise he is, but he has given an interview sort of his recollections of the All Things Must Pass sessions. And he is very clear that John Lennon is playing on this track. He just very casually says, Ringo turned up one day, people used to pop in and out all the time, and I was playing with John. John was there too, and George and Ringo. The only person who wasn't there was Paul, and we're all playing, and I thought, this is great, and Ringo stands next to me playing the tambourine, and the interviewer goes, is John on that album? And he goes, yeah, he didn't want his name on it. He was there just for fun, just playing. Do you remember what track it was? And he goes, was it the Dylan track? And I'm thinking, no, Alan, you were there. Don't ask the interviewer. If not for you, yeah, I think that was the one with John was on. I think. I know Ringo was definitely playing tambourine on My Sweet Lord. So it's perhaps, not the most reliable testimony, Your Honor.
Yeah, that could fall apart. That evidence. It's all circumstantial.
Yeah, but I don't think John would have played on this. I can't see it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of John's movements during 1970. I know we talked from the Plastic Ono Band record, but he comes back to England purely to do his own record. He's not. He's in America for a big chunk of the spring and summer, so it's not a given. But George sings it live at the 1992 Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert.
Bob Fest.
Yes.
He does 2 tracks. He does Absolutely Sweet Marie and If Not For You. And I don't think If Not For You has ever been officially released. Absolutely Sweet Marie made the album. And he and Bob rehearsed it for Bangladesh in 1971, but didn't do it. But the rehearsal is on the 2005 reissue of the Bangladesh CD. But George has got form.
He's done a couple of Dylan songs, hasn't he?
Oh, he's done a lot. He's done If Not For You, I Don't Want to Do It, one version of which dates from around this time, Abandoned Love, Absolutely Sweet Marie, Mama You've Been On My Mind, and he takes a pass at Every Grain of Sand on the Rockline interview with, I can't read my notes there.
I think Jeff Lynne is in the room.
With Jeff Lynne.
Which
Jeff
is one of your favourite interviews. And it's that pass of Every Grain of Sand it's ropey, but it's very charming.
It's ropey, but it's very charming. It's if people haven't heard that, it's one of the most revealing interviews I've ever heard by anybody. Yeah. It's a kind of phone-in program, syndicated thing in the US, and he's promoting Cloud 9, and people are ringing in, and George is really, really grumpy at the beginning, and then he relaxes into it. And Jeff is clearly in the room the whole time, just sitting, and then he kind of becomes very nice and very reflective, very, very sort of contemplative about himself, and then he picks up a guitar, and he and Jeff, I think it's Let It Be Me, they do a nice version of that.
Yeah, the Everly song.
This is the first time ever in which he suddenly goes, yeah, my next thing is my new group, the Traveling Wilburys, and the interviewer just completely misses it, and
it's the first mention of them.
Yeah.
So the spectre, if it is a spectre of Bob, but the Bobfluence, so to speak, goes into side 2, track 3, Behind That Locked Door, which is...
I see what you did there. That was very
smooth,
well done. Yeah.
So Behind That Locked Door is a song about Dylan. I wonder, is it intentionally back to back with If Not For You?
I think it must be intentionally back to back. I mean, this is really a song, I suppose, about the friendship between the two of them, and it's a sort of exhortation. Dylan was in his slightly reclusive period, I suppose, and it's George writing about that, and this follows on. He supposedly wrote this after seeing Dylan and meeting Dylan, hanging out with Dylan at the Isle of Wight festival.
And Dylan, obviously had a respect for George. He played the Hare Krishna mantra, apparently, did he?
Yeah,
pre-stage music.
Yeah, so in December 2000, George gave an interview to Billboard, and he said he actually began writing the song the night before Dylan played the Isle of Wight festival, and at that same time, George gave Dylan his vintage Gibson J200 acoustic guitar, and Dylan kind of reciprocated by having the Hare Krishna mantra, the single, played before he took the stage. And at that, George and Patty were staying with Dylan and his family during the week. There's some very funny photographs kicking around of George and Bob playing tennis. Have you seen those?
They're very funny, yeah, they're great.
Because they're like full denim on denim outfits, and they're just kind of running around with old wooden tennis rackets that look like they come from the 30s. But this is, again, very much in the style of the band. So he's writing about Dylan, he's writing about their friendship, and he's recording this in the style of those songs he's heard at.
So timeline-wise, there wasn't really an opportunity for this to be presented to the Beatles. No, there wouldn't have been. No.
I mean, this I think, if you look, unless George kind of hummed it to John and Ringo in the audience at the Isle of Wight, I think this was really wheeled it out in January.
I do like this quote from Patty Boyd, where she says, Bob Dylan was an odd person. When we went to see him in Woodstock, it was absolute agony. He just wouldn't talk. He would not talk. He certainly had no social graces whatsoever. I don't know whether it was because he was shy of George or what the story was, but it was agonizingly difficult. And his wife wasn't much help because she had babies to look after. Yeah. I like how annoyed that is.
That sounds like, babies.
I went and did your thing and I didn't have a good time.
Yeah.
It's kind of
your babies got in the way. Can we mention the pedal steel on this track?
Oh yes, who's that?
So this is Pete Drake, and this is just absolutely. I think this is just gorgeous track, and the guitar work is fantastic. So Drake is a kind of session player, producer. You may know him from such hits as Lynn Anderson's "I Never Promised You a Rose Garden." That's a big hit in Ireland, I imagine.
Big hit, yeah.
Tammy Wynette's "Stand By Your Man" and "Lay Lady Lay." So he is brought over specifically to play on these sessions, and supposedly the story is Ringo picks him up at the airport. I find that hard to believe that Ringo standing there at the airport with a little sign saying Pete Drake, and then drives on. But supposedly Pete Drake sees all these country and western cassettes or 8-tracks or something lying around the car, and that one thing leads to another, and Ringo's whisked off to Nashville to record Bouquet of Blues.
You mentioned Lay Lady Lay there, and that really is kind of something that is a track that kind of you can feel leads directly into the All Things Must Pass vibe, isn't it? It
is. And what one other thing people might want to go and look for on YouTube, we mentioned Peter Frampton. There's an audio clip on YouTube against a photograph where Pete Drake had a hit in 1964 with a song called Forever that featured a thing that he had invented called a talkbox.
Oh yes,
where he put a little tube in his mouth, played the little steel guitar, and there is literally the moment that he is demonstrating this to Peter Frampton, going, "Hey, Pete, you might be interested in this." And of course, this is Peter Frampton's entire career is based on his use of this.
You can't say that. We'll never get Peter Frampton on the show now.
I think he's quite honest about this, but it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating to hear that kind of birth of a moment, you know.
So side 2, track 4 is Let It Down. And if you're counting the Beatle reject songs, this is track number 2, because this was explicitly offered and played to the Beatles. Well, after he wrote it in 1968, he played it for them in January 69, and they said no. Again, it's hard to imagine it in the form that it's in on All Things Must Pass being a Beatles song.
Yeah. I mean, there is a kind of a demo version which is more Beatle-y, I suppose, but this is one of those songs that Phil gets his hands on, and you'll notice there's one of these tracks on each side, one of these big bombastic, and it does play. It's it plays with kind of light and shade. George is inventing the whole Pixies grunge Nirvana thing, loud,
That's
quiet. But this is another one of those sort of dense mix. And it's a kind of odd song lyrically. We've got all the kind of odes to Bob Dylan and the sort of spiritual things, and this is what one of his biographers says. This is a pretty erotic love song, perhaps to a woman, perhaps
to a woman,
perhaps to a woman who isn't Pattie Boyd.
I see.
That's a thing, and it's one of the very few songs that George does not cover in his "I Me Mine" book. So you kind of think, well, is there reading too much into it that he was a bit regretful of that?
That he's decided to park it. Well, we know that in January 1969, around the time he walked out of the Beatles, he was seeing somebody else who wasn't Pattie Boyd. Isn't that what we know at the time?
Yes.
Yes, it was just the times.
We're not passing judgment on that, but except we are really. But
looking at the timeline, I mean, 1970 for Pattie Boyd is a pretty intense year, because in March 1970, that's when George actually moves into his Friar Park mansion that we kind of associate with him so much.
Yes.
And it is funny how much we know about the Beatles' houses between George's Friar Park and John's Ascot Mansion house. These houses play an important part in their image.
Do, and I think in March 1970, Friar Park was a bit of a tip, really. It needed a lot of work done. They were living in a little cottage in the grounds at one point. This supposedly is the location for the last time all 4 Beatles were together, that Pattie Boyd had a birthday party on the 17th of March, and Chris O'Dell in her book says, John, Paul, Ringo were all there. And
this is 1970, isn't it?
Yeah, and if that's right...
that's not really what...
it's about a week or so before Paul makes his kind of
big announcement.
And this is this idea that if I think we've on previous episodes in this series have come to the conclusion, or at least I've come to the conclusion, that the Beatles kind of broke up by accident, that it just kind of stumbled into this. I mean, is it conceivable that they all just rocked up at George's new house to have a look at the house? And
maybe,
she's very,
it'd be
very
lovely
clear
to think it.
Yeah, and then suddenly, as I say, Paul puts out that press statement. It's a little bit, unclear what's happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, it would be nice to think that was the last time they were all together.
But 1970 for speaking about Pattie Boyd, that we've mentioned already the Layla album, but this is the year where Clapton starts,
plighting his troth,
playing those mind games
forever. Yeah. So this is sort of late 1970. Eric, I think, just comes right out and says, I'm dating your sister, but actually, it's you're the one that I want. I like the song, and then she rejects him, and he goes off and writes Layla and has some heroin, and it all becomes very sordid.
Yeah. Let's move on.
Okay, I was just going to say, and to complete the thing, Paula Boyd goes off and has an affair with Bobby Whitlock from Clapton's band. It was different time.
Doesn't she have another sister who marries Mick Fleetwood?
Yes, twice. She married him twice.
So. Yeah, to marry him once is understandable. Twice,
well,
though,
to marry him twice, just inexcusable.
Can't be doing that. Side 2, track 5, the last song on the side. I love this song, Run of the Mill.
You and Olivia. This is Olivia's favorite song.
I just adore this song. I just think it's so. It's just got it all. It's got the spiritual stuff. It's got a good tune. It's got a good lyric. This is a Beatle quality song.
And it's about
they're all great songs. That's probably the wrong thing to say, but this is a song that could have slotted in to Abbey Road or anywhere.
And it's about Paul.
So you say, but I mean, I think you're seeing shadows on the wall, Steve. Not everything can be about Paul.
I think it's pretty. I think you, if you go back, and I'm sure you listen all the time to our past episodes. I think we did include this in the episode where it was the Beatles writing songs about
the Beatles.
The Beatles.
So he says, "Tomorrow when you rise, another day for you to realize me, or send me down again as the days stand up on end. You've got me wondering how I lost your friendship, but I see it in your eyes. Though I'm beside you, I can't carry the blame for you." Maybe.
It's got Paul written all through it. But
he's never explicitly said that, has he?
Like a stick of Blackpool rock. And again, I can't believe you like this song because it's a very band-influenced song as well.
Maybe I've got the band all wrong.
I think you're going to have to. Yeah, it's working. It's working.
So we're halfway through the double album part. We can do this, team.
We can do this.
We can do it.
We can do this. We've got another hour to go.
Side 3, track 1, another fantastic song. Beware of Darkness.
This. It varies from day to day, but week to week. But this might be my favorite song on the album. I just love this song.
Yeah, and the demo, which was originally on the bootleg, which eventually came out on the 2001 reissue. Yeah. That demo is lovely, where he kind of says, this is a new song. It's hot off the skillet.
Yes,
and it famously has the "Beware of Abco."
Beware of lyric. Abco. And you think, that was 27th of May, 1970, and he's singing "Beware of Abco."
Yeah, that's like a month after Paul throws his toys out of the pram because of Abco, and George is saying, "Yeah, Abco."
I always assumed that was a kind of sarky swipe at Paul.
You reckon? There you go again. There you. It's all about Paul.
So the lineup on this is essentially again Derek and the Dominoes, but this time with Ringo and George and Gary Wright.
And Leon Russell does a cover, doesn't he? Which I haven't heard.
You're very fortunate. Leon Russell does a terrible cover on his debut album from around the same time, but George obviously forgave him that because they do a duet at the concert for Bangladesh. On this song. And Marianne Faithfull does a version. Came out in 1984, but she recorded it in 1971. So she was an early adopter.
Interesting. And again, it's another song that really shines at the concert for George.
It is. You should have been there.
Were you there? Never mind. Side 3, track 2 is Apple Scruffs. And this is another song I like. And I think for the first time on All Things Must Pass, I feel Beatledom intrudes. Beatledom appears. This is it's a song that's about, the Apple Scruffs used to hang around outside, the fans used to hang around outside the Apple offices. But it also is very sort of light and fluffy. It has a Beatles touch to it. I can imagine this kind of slotting in between, Polythene Pam and Mean Mr. Mustard or something like that. It's got those kind of vibes to it.
You think it might be a good Beatles B-side in the vein of Old Brown Shoe or something?
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's got a lightness and I guess it's not going down the deep spiritual personal route like so many of the other songs.
No, I mean, one of the things you would say about this album is that it covers a lot of ground in terms of lyrically. So although he's, I've said he's trying to put a lot of distance between himself and the Beatles in terms of the sound, in terms of the arrangements and writing with Bob Dylan and that type of thing. Nevertheless, the Beatles kind of hang over this album because a lot of the songs are about the Beatles. Yeah. It's about that kind of dichotomy between, I'm a Beatle, I'll always be a Beatle, but as you say, George never really liked being in the Beatles. He's not a fan of the Beatles. This is about the Beatles fans. There's a spiritual side. There's a kind of erotic love songs in there. It covers a lot of ground, but this is a charming song.
It is charming. Yeah.
And what I would say, coming from someone like George, who is so notoriously sort of, doesn't like the what comes with being a Beatle.
Yeah.
This is a very affectionate
yes
nod to the fans, and it's not something you would necessarily expect from George, and that makes me think it's a very sincere song.
Yeah, he's not laughing at them, and it's just him live on an acoustic guitar, isn't it, with harmonica, and that really sits well against, in contrast to the rest of the record. It's very, very nice.
It is. Some very interesting outtakes where he's playing the harmonica in a sort of Bob Dylan style harmonica holder, and every time he moves his head, his beard catches in the harmonica holder. This is why Bob Dylan doesn't have a beard.
That's very true. No, it's certainly not a big bushy George Harrison 1970 beard. And
can I give you my fun fact
go
about
on
this?
Then, fun fact.
It was a double A side in Australia with What Is Life, and it topped the Go Set National Top 60 in May 1971. So technically, it was a #1 hit in Australia.
Technically, being the key word in that sentence. Apple Scruffs, great little song. And then side 3, track 3 is the Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp. And I'm going to throw a little hand grenade in here and say, I think this is kind of the first clunker on the album. I'm not a huge fan of this song. I'm sorry.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I just think it just doesn't rattle my cage, I guess.
Well, George does say it's a kind of piece of personal indulgence.
Yeah.
It was originally a song called Everybody Nobody, which was about cars and the newly introduced highway code.
Oh, I'm sorry we didn't get that.
Yeah, so, you're saying this is a clunker, but, it could have been worse. It could have been worse. But this is written as a tribute to Frank Crisp, who was the lawyer that the original owner of Friar Park.
Yes.
But it's a sort of guided tour, through the hall and down the stairs. It's a little guided tour of the estate. I think this is charming. I can't believe you don't like this.
Sorry. Well, Harrison has described Sir Frank Crisp as a cross between Lewis Carroll and Walt Disney, and certainly he seems to have been, to put it mildly, an eccentric. And many of the, for the time, even though he was pre-Pythonesque, he sort of had a Pythonesque view of things that really chimed with George when he saw the things that he'd left behind in the house from 50 plus odd years earlier.
Yes, so, the whole house is full of sort of little jokes.
Yeah.
So and again, we talked about at the beginning about George's love of dreadful puns and things, and I think it chimes very much with what this chap Frank Crisp was doing. So there's in the architecture, and you see it, I think it's on the inside of 33 1/3, there's a little carving, a little relief of a monk holding a frying pan with a hole in it, and the caption is "To Holy Friars."
There you go. You see.
So it's that kind of dreadful, but Frank Crisp spent thousands of pounds to put that in the architecture of the building.
And another inscription inspired Ding Dong, but we might talk about that another day.
Yes, a whole episode.
A whole episode on Ding Dong.
On Ding Dong.
So again, the Beatles' houses inspiring or informing what they're about. Yeah. Side 3, track 4 is "Awaiting on You All," and we've talked a lot about digs at Paul that pop up on the album. You think there's John and Yoko digs here?
This until I started sort of reading some background on this and doing some research, because hey, we do research. Doesn't seem like it, but we do. They said, the first line is a dig at John and Yoko. You don't need a love-in, you don't need a bedpan, you don't need a horoscope or a microscope to see the mess that you're in.
Too many people preaching practices.
Exactly. It had never occurred to me before, but it actually does sound like a bit of a dig at the bed-in campaign and, all of that.
Well, I don't think George would have been immune to laughing at the bed-ins. I don't know. Do we know?
No.
I think he would have he was a man of peace, and he would have appreciated the message of peace. But he must have found the bed-ins. Or do we know what did he ever say anything explicitly about about the bed-ins?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I can't think of any time he specifically commented on that. But I mean, John, was principled and but at the same time, he was prone to jumping on a bandwagon, or whether that was part of the people or the sort of new left and that type of thing. But they both men might have been principled and all you need is love and et cetera, but they approached it, I think, in very different ways. And I think the more I think about it, the more I look at that, I think, that's a bit of a dig at John.
Yeah, and it has a big Spectre sound. It's the one on that side that's got the big Spectre sound, I guess.
It is, and I mean, again, you notice there's one of these on every side. Yeah. So this has got maybe 5 overdubbed slide solos. But those were solos that George did after Phil Spector had left. So George is kind of buying into the style of the production. But I love this song.
It is a good song.
It is great. And we talked about in Plastic Underground about EMI censoring the lyrics on the lyric sheet. So they did the same here.
What did they censor?
And I remember hearing the song when I first bought the album and looking at the lyrics and thinking, what is that? That doesn't... He sings the line, the Pope owns 51% of General Motors and the stock exchange is the only thing he's qualified to quote us. And EMI decided that little bit of a swipe, they would take that out. It's in the handwritten text in I Me Mine. George has form taking a swipe at the Catholic Church.
Has he? What else has he done?
Well, you've got if you look at the inside sleeve of Living in the Material World, it's a kind of parody of the Last Supper, and George is in the middle with a giant bishop's hat on, and Brainwashed contains the song P2 Vatican Blues Last Saturday Night, which takes a swipe at the Vatican Bank and shady Italian Masonic lodges and Cardinal Marcinkus, is that the Marcinkus, the banker, Vatican banker? So he didn't have much truck with organized religion.
Fair enough. And in incongruous songs in unusual places, I once heard this song playing quite loudly in one of those Tiger stores. Those stores that sort of sell random plastic tat. I was wandering around one day, and they decided to play Waiting on You All, which was nice.
That's very nice.
So last track on side 3, track 5, and we've gotten really to the top of the mountain because it's the title track, All Things Must Pass. And, we all know and love All Things Must Pass, and it's worth reminding ourselves. So when the album hit the shelves, George was 27 years of age.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Crazy thing. I mean, it's an incredibly mature lyric for somebody at 27. Well, for someone at any age, but and again, I've been quoting Simon Lang, and he basically is saying this is the lyric that approaches Dylan's standard.
It's kind of faultless. And if we're playing, the how many songs were rejected by the Beatles, we're up to 3. This is a third song that the Beatles were presented with at the start of '69.
Yeah, I've written down here, it is a hanging offence that the Beatles rejected this song.
I would totally agree with you, and, again, it's something we've talked about before about, the Get Back, Let It Be forum, if songs like this had gotten through in a sort of naturalistic way, they would sound fantastic. We have clips of bootlegs of the Beatles harmonizing on the chorus of All Things Must Pass, and it's so tantalizingly close to, it wouldn't have taken much to shape it. It's so close.
That is what's frustrating, because George introduces this song on the 2nd of January, so
right
day
up the
one.
top,
And they work on it for 4 days, intermittently. They work on it for 4 days, and you can hear George saying, I want it to feel like the band. And Lennon moves from guitar to the kind of Lowry organ, which is that kind of Garth Hudson feel. And then at one point, they discuss the idea of George maybe just doing this as a solo Beatles track. And you think, well, maybe that was just Lennon was keen. You do that as a solo track, and I don't have to play on it. That's Lennon was always complaining about George's songs being too complicated, and and he clearly just. But this is the day one, and they work on it for 4 days, and they work on it again back in Apple Studios at the end of the month, and. Rejected again.
It is a pity. It is a pity. And who knows what sort of Frankenstein construction they might put together of a Beatles All Things Must Pass in the 2021 box set. Time will tell. Paul sings this at the concert for George, which is a nice choice.
Again, what must he have been thinking? Was he thinking, "Oh, this could have been this? We could have put this on Abbey Road."
He was thinking, "All these people here to see me."
I'm glad you said that and not me. What I would say is there was no sense at that concert. If you look at the DVD, or if you're one of those people that happened to be there on the night, if you know anybody was there. There was no sense on the night that Paul was anything other than sort of humble and deferential and respectful, I have to say.
Paul is a real team player on that night, and he and why shouldn't he be? And he judges it perfectly, and why shouldn't he have the way he comes in? I think I've said it before. It's only that bit right at the end where he says, "Hey, doesn't Danny look like George?" Where
he can't help himself.
Macca comes out.
He's been bottling that up, and then it just all comes out.
But his version is lovely, and you can't. It's All Things Must Pass. Shut up! It's just a great song.
It is. And again, it's the band. It's that influence. And George is again very specific. He says, I was trying to write something like, I was trying to be Robbie Robertson. I was trying to write like the band. So again, it's an all pervasive, that influence. And
it's, maybe we should mention the elephant in the room right now, but it's been the curtain raiser of a 2021 All Things Must Pass renovation.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the 2020 remix of All Things Must Pass that's landed in our laps recently?
No.
You don't like it?
I don't care for it.
Okay.
I just...
But it's not going to erase your, Phil Spector version, so,
No, but I just... it just doesn't sound right, and I maybe it's because this album, in the same way that a lot of people didn't like the Pepper... remix simply because they were so familiar with it. I am so familiar with this album, and I just adore this album, and it just jars slightly, and it just strikes me as again that notion that they just turned everything up a bit and boosted the treble, and you can hear everything separated out, and it just doesn't quite sound right. Whereas
Smiley face EQ, they call it,
Yeah, I prefer that kind of a slightly more subdued, slightly understated, everything kind of just in the mix. And we maybe talk about this a little bit later in the fourth or fifth hour of this episode.
I do like it. I think it's nice. My own theory is that these remixes are happening because we're living in an age of the new mono, that this is designed for smart speakers in kitchens.
Yes.
That's kind of what they're designed for. And, when the remix came out there recently, because of where I was at, I only had my phone. So I'm like, I'm going to play this on my phone through my phone speakers. And, you could hear the differences, but, it's a different era. But we'll come back a little bit later on and talk about what might be coming down the pipes for an All Things Must Pass reissue.
Yeah.
Let's leave side 3 behind and go on to side 4, track 1. And I'm going to say 2 things. The side 4, track 1 is I Dig Love.
Yep.
I think side 4 is perhaps the weakest of the 4 sides.
Okay.
And I Dig Love is probably my least favorite song on the album.
I agree.
Oh, good.
Should we mark a note somewhere in our diaries
that we've agreed on?
Finally happened. We can just quit the podcast right now. It's a kind of just throwaway, apparently written more or less in the studio, and it's odd that given the sort of outtakes and the other songs that were available and the things that were actually recorded but didn't make it, this there doesn't seem to be much to it. And again, this is a song that he doesn't refer to in "I Me Mine." So again,
well, the lyrics are kind of slight in a way, I need love in the morning.
I love dig
love in the evening, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, it always sounds to me, I think it sounds different to the rest of the album in a different way. Chapel Scruffs, that sort of, that kind of riff, it always feels to me like creeping around music. I'm creeping around. I'm creeping around. Like, that's what it always reminds me about. And I kind of can't take it seriously.
Where is this going?
No?
It is. It is a kind of odd, and particularly to open the final side.
Yeah. It's and I guess, we talk about this notion of gateways and impressions. As an impression into side 4, it's like, oh, are we running on fumes now? Are we,
Yeah.
So...
But I agree with you that this is the weakest song on the album. But I have to say, there's 2 of my favorite songs are on side 4. So,
well, okay, let's press on then, because side 4, track 2, is another song that we don't think it was rejected by the Beatles, but it could possibly have been done by the Beatles, because it's "The Art of Dying," and that was another song that was written a considerable amount of time earlier.
Yes. Again,
possibly 66.
Possibly 66. Yeah. So you think, well, this might have been kicking around for inclusion on Revolver. So if you can imagine a reworking of Revolver that included "Art of Dying" and "Isn't It a Pity?"
Yeah.
Because there was an interview in 1969 in October, and George refers to the song saying, "I've been working on a song about reincarnation since 1966." So at least the sort of song, the germination of the song dates back to 1966. And again, you've got that whole Tibetan Book of the Dead, that Timothy Leary book.
Yes.
There's some of the lyrics seem to refer to that, and that would tie in with "Tomorrow Never Knows." John and George were,
true,
on the LSD at that time. So it would tie in with that. And supposedly the original line is, "And nothing Mr. Epstein can do will keep me here with you," instead of "Sister Mary."
Interesting.
He missed the opportunity to say Mother Mary,
yeah.
And then another swipe at Paul. I think this is a fantastic production.
Yeah,
and I think this is maybe Phil Spector's best service of a song on the album.
Fair enough. So you like the Epstein?
I love this song. It's the Phil Collins track as well.
Oh yeah, now we're not going to go that full story again, but obviously he's not on this version.
Yeah. We think,
yeah. So side 4, track 3 is "Isn't It a Pity?" But sure, we've already had that. We don't need another one.
We don't need another one. I quite like this. I think this is a kind of nice little understated version. And again, my theory is that there are 2 versions because the song bears 2 meanings. And the first one, which is put up front on the album, is about the demise of the Beatles, and this is a much more kind of understated. And this is a song for Paddy. I think.
And then that leaves us to the final track on the album, side 4, track 4, "Hear Me Lord," and this is the 4th song that we know definitely was rejected by the Beatles.
Yes, this turns up on the in the Get Back sessions. I love this song.
Yeah, it's quite something.
It is.
To think that this is, we know that George has had a spiritual awakening in the Beatles and the whole "Within Without You" kind of vibe that he brings. But, it's still pretty striking, where one Beatle is singing, I don't believe in God and Buddha and all the rest, and then another Beatle is singing, "Hear Me Lord." It's
help me. Yeah, this is
utterly sincere.
It's utterly sincere. This is a plea to God for forgiveness, for, help me cope, help me find direction, help me. Being a good Presbyterian, my mother will be very pleased. I recognize this from Psalm 27, which is, "Hear me, Lord, when I call to you."
That's where I've heard it before.
That's where you've heard it before. But it's a very kind of naked plea. And you think, this is as shocking as anything John is doing on Plastic Ono Band. I cannot see this song ever being played by the Beatles because of the content, because of the subject matter. In the same way that they're saying, "Cold Turkey, we're not doing that."
Yeah.
I just can't see this being done. And he played it at his first concert, Bangladesh, in the afternoon concert, but it was dropped for the evening set.
Yeah, you do kind of, maybe not take for granted, but you kind of get a blind spot about, how explicit some of this spiritualism is. That song came on the radio the other day all those years ago, and it's got that line of it, talk about God, he's the reason that we exist. I think that's a very explicit line to put into a pop song that you kind of think, oh, that's just George being George. But
you see, I think that starts with arguably "My Sweet Lord," where suddenly it's a pop song, and suddenly, but you're kind of singing Hallelujah, and then suddenly, without realizing it, you're not singing Hallelujah anymore. You're singing Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
You've heard his version of "It Don't Come Easy."
Whose version? George's version.
George's version. So he does a guide vocal.
Yeah.
And he has backing singers, and in the middle of the song they sing Hare Krishna.
Right.
And Ringo, he just then presented it to Ringo, and Ringo said, "I'm not having that," and just mixed the backing vocals right down. But if you listen to Ringo's version, you can hear very faintly Hare Krishna. Well, so he was just slipping this kind of thing into, but this is different. This is a really explicit, very personal, and it's one of those things that you're almost embarrassed to be kind of a witness to that kind of naked bearing of the soul, but again, really catchy little kind of hooks in there as well. I really like this song, and it's the last song. This is the song that he signs off on.
Yeah, and it's we talked at the start of the album. Well, it's not the album. It's not what he signs off on, Stephen. There's another 2 sides of music to have.
Well, yeah, but they're the bonus fun, the fun tracks.
But seriously, we talk about how the album opens in a very, subtle and slinky way.
Yeah.
And it sort of ends, it doesn't really end with one of those sort of bye-bye songs that albums tend to end with. It's ending in a very brash way.
Yeah, and it's not a song where there's a resolution, so it's not as if there's a kind of it leaves it in a sort of open-ended question. We've been on this journey across 4 sides of vinyl, and we're still leaving it with this, help me find a way, hear me, Lord, what do I do, where do I go? It's a very, very brave thing, I would say. It's in its own way, I think, as brave and as stark as Plastic Ono Band.
And I guess, at that time people were looking for answers from their rock stars, and George was kind of saying the whole notion of prayer is one of putting yourself at the mercy of, a God or the God or whatever it is that you believe in. So he's not even giving an answer. He's just saying,
no. And it is striking that around that period, so you had, Clapton has Presence of the Lord. Bobby Whitlock has a song on his first solo album, which again, I really recommend people, if you like All Things Must Pass and Layla, his solo albums are very good. He has, Another Day Without Jesus. So suddenly religion is an acceptable, almost compulsory. Everybody has to have a
Birds, isn't it? Jesus song. Is just all right. And that Birds
yeah. So suddenly this becomes a thing around this time,
And that feeds us into, sure, isn't it, the following year's Jesus Christ Superstar time. You mentioned something there about the Hallelujah Hare Krishna issue. I'm going to go down a sidetrack for a sec. There was somebody posted a thing, RTE, the Irish National Broadcaster, has a very good archive website, and they had an interview with a woman from 1969 talking about Ireland's first transcendental meditation centre, and trying to explain to people what meditation was and what mantras were and what chanting was. And it's quite sweet and interesting, but for a country that was doing back-to-back rosaries, I thought people kind of know what mantras are, really.
Yes, we know what the chanting is.
Don't you know? So yeah, it's interesting how George manages to mix those things. We've done it. We've done the 6 sides of All Things Must Pass, but of course, once the album's recorded, it has to get a sleeve. It has to be delivered to the shops.
So much more to talk about.
There's so much. We're only getting started, folks. But, it comes back to this notion of, you're experiencing the album through what it looks like, how it appears. And, All Things Must Pass is, not only is it a triple album, but it's a triple album with lyric printed sleeves and a poster. It's in a very hard form box, and it has that picture on the front.
Yeah. So the fact of it being in a box is kind of significant. Let It Be has come out in a very limited run in a box, but not like this. This is boxed with kind of gold embossed lettering on the spine. This is like classical music. This is like a sort of classical music collection. So it's very striking from that point of view. But the cover, again, I think it kind of divides opinion. It's a kind of very downbeat, understated, black and white, slightly sepia toned. And if you kind of look at it, it's not a very striking photograph. But then you've got the whole symbolism of George sitting there and 4 reclining gnomes, surrounding him. So I mean, the way you look at it is he's 4 garden gnomes in a state of repose or possibly exhaustion, and George is towering over them. So it's all that symbolism is there.
Well, the photographer who took it, Barry Feinstein, he's adamant, or he's pretty clear that these are the Beatles. These gnomes are Beatle representatives.
Yes, I mean he talks about it. He has a book. He died some years ago, but there's a book of his photographs came out quite recently called "Be Here Now," and he says, I hung around Briar Park for a while. Last day, took 20 minutes, got a chair, umbrella. That was it. But he said, when I saw the gnomes, I picked them because it looked like a good picture, and I thought symbolically that that's what it could be. Did I mention it to George? I don't remember, but that was in my head. What else could it be?
I know what you mean when you say, it's a bit of a dour image, but it's one of those things that, transcends what it is because it's the cover of All Things Must Pass,
Yeah.
It's almost like the name, the Beatles themselves. You kind of forget the pun. It's just the Beatles, it's become what it is.
It's become what it is. And it kind of sums up George perfectly, as he kind of in gardener mode with his hat and his Wellington boots and the
rest of the design, apart from Barry Feinstein doing the photographs, is a guy called Tom Wilkes, and he's designing a lot of albums around that time. He does like the Delaney and Bonnie album covers. Interestingly, he also did Eric Clapton's debut album cover, which I think has a similarity to All Things Must Pass, because it's kind of Eric Clapton sitting nonchalantly in a chair, kind of not really making the effort, so to speak.
Yeah.
And, you could think, could All Things Must Pass be a bit of a Mickey take? Probably not. I'm probably
I don't know. I mean, it hadn't occurred to me, but I didn't. I have that album. I've had that album for years, and
you've never made the connection.
I've never made the connection, but I think it might be a connection. But I've never understood the album cover because
Eric's
it's just Clapton.
Cover.
Yeah, it's kind of Clapton sitting in a chair. There's a couple of rolls of carpet. There's a couple of apples lying around that you can see in the background. There's 2 legs of a chair. It just seems to me to be a badly cropped photograph. So I don't know, but it could be. Could be. But George very, very fond of the gnomes. The gnomes pop up again in 33 1/3. There are gnomes in the video of Ding Dong.
And again, it's the house. It's Friar Park's gardens.
It's Friar Park, yeah.
The whole image.
On that webinar that Olivia did, she said it was only the second batch of gnomes ever imported into the UK.
Really?
I don't know. I don't know who told her that, but apparently Feinstein says the gnomes were originally part of Friar Park, and then they were removed. And when Harrison bought the house, somebody got in touch with them and said, "Hey, I have gnomes from your garden." So
fair enough.
There you go.
But the form factor is striking, as you say. It's in this hard box. It's got gold lettering. I don't think it's ever really not been in a box. I can't recall any budget sleeved version popping out.
No, I'm not aware. I mean, maybe in some other jurisdiction, perhaps people could let us know. But I think there's never been a music for pleasure budget.
It's always been
version of this.
There has been 8 tracks and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the cost of it when it came out. It was $12. It was the list price in America. £5 in the UK. And if you stick those things into inflation calculators, that's $80 in today's money and £75 to £80 in today's money as well. And if you go to your online retailer to buy a triple vinyl All Things Must Pass today, it'll cost you £75 to £80.
Yeah.
So,
but that's nuts to think £75 and it got to number 1.
Yeah.
It's sold by the juggernaut load.
Yeah.
At that price.
Yeah, it certainly did. It went to number 1 in the US. It was there for 7 weeks from January 71. And in the UK, it was number 1 for 8 weeks. from February 1971. New Morning had been number one, actually. Dylan's New Morning had been number one just before it. And My Sweet Lord was number one in the US from December the 26th for 4 weeks. The number ones either side of it, just for curiosity value, were Tears of a Clown by Smokey and the Miracles. And it was knocked off the number one spot by Knock Three Times by Dawn. Classic. And in the UK, the single actually didn't come out until January 71, and it was number one for 5 weeks from the end of January 71. It knocked Grandad off the top spot, and Baby Jump was the track that knocked it off the number one spot.
Somebody told me once, and I don't know if this is true, that it was the first album to be number one in the UK and America at the same time as the lead single off the album was number one in the UK.
That is possibly true, because...
but then somebody else told me Rod Stewart possibly had that, but I don't know.
I don't know. We'll have to... Maybe
somebody out there
the viewers can tell us.
The viewers can tell us.
And the album obviously has a huge afterlife. So... the George, before he died, put out a 30th anniversary version at the start of 2001, and there's an EPK, an electronic press kit you can see online, where he's recreating the cover in his 2000 guise, and it was a reissue that he was intimately involved in, and sadly it just gave us a small insight into what he might have planned to do for the rest of his catalogue, because he writes a charming enough essay up the front of it.
I mean, it's worth getting. The sleeve notes are as you say, charming. There's 5 bonus tracks which are sort of worth hearing. There's the reworked version of My Sweet Lord, which I know you're a big fan of.
I was trying to think, after we talked about it on the My Sweet Lord episode, I was realising I didn't buy that 2001 reissue at the time. How did I know My Sweet Lord so well? And I realised these were the days of Napster back in 2001. And so one of the first things I Napstered was My Sweet Lord 2001. And kids, it's destroying music.
Home taping is killing music. Is there a statute of limitations on that?
I would hope so.
Maybe you have to edit that.
Hopefully it's about 19 and a half years. But yeah.
And of course, he reworked the artwork on the album.
Yes, and he kind of, you read the sleeve note and he sort of says, the world is getting concreted over and everything's terrible, and I've redone the, I'm sure he objected to some Henley on Thames planning applications in his time.
I think he objected to everything. But the record label on which it comes out in 2001 is Gnome Records.
Yes.
And you think that's funny. And again, but how do you spell Gnome? GN Ohm symbol. Ohm symbol. You see what he did there? It's another one of those unfunny puns.
But I'd forgotten until, we're kind of looking at it today, that this was a big hit back in 2001.
It was huge. It debuted at number 4 on the Billboard album chart, and Capitol Records had not produced enough.
Yeah, I remember
copies.
It being a very big deal at the time.
Yeah, it was huge. But I bought it on CD at the time, and it was only years later that I picked it up on vinyl. But they were pretty flat-footed. They completely underestimated how popular this was going to be.
And as I mentioned earlier on, my original CD was, from the late 80s, and that was, in one of those big chunky fat boy.
Big chunky. I used to have that, and I have no idea where it went.
Where you get the bit of foam inside. They were the days. And the 2001 reissue kind of, as we mentioned earlier on, kind of rejigs the tracks that it's album 1 and album 2 with bonus tracks on disc 1 and the Applejam as bonus tracks on disc 2. There's a couple of other reissues over the year. There's a 40th anniversary vinyl version in 2010.
Yep, that's the one. That's the one to get.
And the sticker on the front of that says quite pointedly, 2 George Harrison LPs and 1 Applejam session. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Had you written in at that point?
I was not the proof writer on that.
I think that was a record store day
release.
In America. It was limited to 7,000 copies, and they restored the original artwork. And get one if you can.
Okay,
that's my advice there.
And then it was remastered again for the Apple Years box set in 2014. Yeah, and also came out on CD at that time. We've talked an awful lot about songs. There's a lot of songs that didn't make it. I Live For You turned up as one of the bonus tracks on the 2001 reissue, and that's got some 2000 Danny Harrison, George Harrison drumming and guitaring on it as well. But it's a nice song.
It is, yeah. He basically they sort of overdubbed on the original tracks from 1970.
And other songs that have been recorded are Gopla Krishna, Going Down to Golders Green, Dehradun. They're definitely recorded, we think, aren't they?
They were there. Yeah, I mean, I've heard you can get these on bootlegs. Beautiful Girl was another one. Turns up on 33 and a third. Cosmic Empire, Mother Divine, Down to the River, which he turned into a song called Rockin' Chair in Hawaii on Brainwashed, and a song called When Every Song's Been Sung, which Ringo recorded for Rotogravure. That's the one that Ringo covered, and as a result, George issued court proceedings against him.
Blimey.
So, do you remember that Aspel?
Yes, they talk about that when they're suing each other.
Ringo just embarrasses George by saying, yeah, the last time we were together, he sued me for... and I've never really understood why. Ringo's version has a guitar solo that sounds very like George Harrison, but it's by Lon Van Eaton, and I suspect that might be... George felt he was trying to pass this off, that George was there or playing or something,
So, all this talk of extra tracks and mixes and things brings us into what a 2021 All Things Must Pass will be. So since we began this odyssey of talking about All Things Must Pass on Nothing Is Real, essentially our dreams have become much closer to reality because we've been told, not explicitly, but in the strangest, most coded terms, that there's a big All Things Must Pass project coming next year. Yeah. So, as we mentioned already, there's the 2020 remix of the title track, which I do like. It's a different vibe.
I'll probably learn to love it.
And I'm assuming that whatever. Let's take a guess at what's going to be on the box set, because the original double album part minus Applejam is 76 minutes. You can fit that on one CD if you want.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing a box set we're going to get. The Spectre version is going to be there. They can't take it out.
No.
And then we're going to get a remixed version of All Things Must Pass.
Yes.
And then what else? The Beware of Abco demo?
I would like to hear
the whole thing.
The whole, effectively his equivalent of the Isha demos, where he just sat down in May and played the entire backlog of songs to Phil Spector.
Then there's those unreleased songs that we just mentioned a second ago. So that could be another part of it. Songs that were completed with the band. Yeah. Then there's going to be a massive alternate takes, because George describes recording the album as whatever mass of musicians would be in the room, they would run the song down a number of times to refine the arrangement and then get their takedown. And we're assuming that chunks of those are on tape somewhere.
They must all have been recorded. And say we started by saying, we've lots of anecdotal evidence. So again, in the Phil Collins autobiography, he describes just take after take of that song until his hands were bleeding. Frampton says the same. Everyone describes the same method of working, where you just had dozens and dozens of musicians in the studio. And Bobby Whitlock talks about whenever the take was over, all of the musicians would pile into the control room to listen to it, which is Phil Spector did not care for this at all. In his world, he stayed in the control room. So take after take after take was run down. And there are dozens of, it's a heavily bootlegged set of sessions, and these bootlegs run to 6, 7, 8 CD sets. So there's a lot there. My concern is going to be that it's going to be like Abbey Road or Sgt. Pepper, where you get one version of each song.
Well, but even like one version, we're still talking about the potential for something huge. The Spectre album, the new album, a new disc of jams, the songs that didn't make it, the alternate takes version, the demo tapes, and then it would also be, depending on what way the original multi-tracks are in, it'd be a good surround sound mix as well. It could be the first Dolby Atmos one as well.
I would be surprised if there isn't a surround sound mix, just given the nature of the songs. I mean, I think, Spector's negative influence on this, for me anyway, I think is really overstated. I mean, I like the production. There are one or two songs, I've already said Wah Wah, which was the first song recorded, I think is just very overpowering. But, George says himself, we only did 4 or 5 tracks before Phil fell over.
Yeah.
So he was so out of it. And if you recall on the Plastic Ono Band episode we did, you know, John and Yoko were recording later in the year. They had to put ads in the paper
to get his
like,
attention.
Phil, we're ready. Where are you?
Yeah.
So it seems to me, Let It Down, Hear Me Lord, Art of Dying, Awaiting on You All, Wah Wah, and George spaces those out, essentially one per side.
Well, the notion of spacing them out, you know, an album like All Things Must Pass, you ask questions like, A, could it have been a single LP? You know, people always ask that about the White Album and all the rest. Is there a killer? I've tried doing this on Spotify, and it's, you know, you can make a great 45 minutes of music, but, you know, as you can imagine, you kind of miss that spread, which is part of the album's reason.
And if you take the Spectre tracks out, you suddenly realize that a lot of it is effectively an acoustic album. There's quite a pastoral sound to it. So you've got, you know, I'd Have You Anytime, and Sir Frankie Crisp, and Beware of Darkness, and so these are quiet acoustic based songs, and then suddenly you've got these great Phil Spector, and I genuinely think the Spectre influence is overstated.
Yeah, it is a fantastically sequenced album. You know, it really, you know, it really makes a difference. You know, and you know, we've spoken in this season about the debut solo albums, but even you look at something like the opening track on each one, you think of The Lovely Linda, you think of Mother, you think of I'd Have You Anytime. They are three very different first steps of a journey, you know.
That to me is one of the fascinating things is the three directions in which the three main songwriters headed, and also the fact that the one who strode out onto the stage sort of as the solo artist, because again, you know, John's working with Yoko, Paul has got Linda on board. George is just kind of striding out there as a solo artist, but bringing all of his kind of heavy friends, and he's almost showing off his kind of range of contacts. You know, who's in his Rolodex that he can get, and he works very easily with these people.
Is it his best solo album? Is that a redundant question? It is, really, isn't it?
I think it probably is. I think the difficulty is it casts such a shadow. You know, it's like Citizen Kane. So, you know, you've like Orson Welles' first film, George's. It just everything is then measured against that. And although you know, things like Cloud 9, because it doesn't have that sound, everything that comes after seems slightly diminished by having to follow All Things Must Pass.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into the talk of, well, could it have been a single LP, you know, a version of that as well, could he have done two great albums, you know, one for 1970, one for 71, you know, or, you know, one at the end of 70 and one at the start of 72, you know, if you start to bring in some of the latest, I mean, it's all happenstance. I mean,
my own sense is I think it just had to be.
It has to be what it is.
It had to be a double album of songs, you know, it had to be a double album.
Is it the best solo Beatle record?
Again, I would say yes.
Okay.
So
I don't know. It's certainly the best solo Beatle record of 1970. I'll give you that.
Yes. I mean, I don't think that, and again, I'm just kind of like alienating huge sections of our listeners. I don't think anything that John did measures up. I think the only album that could is Plastic Ono Band. But I think All Things Must Pass is a much more listenable album.
Yeah.
You know, Eddie Robson on Twitter said it's just, I don't know if you saw that, the last couple of days, and he said, you know, Plastic Ono Band, it's a fantastically impressive piece of work that I don't ever feel the need to listen to. And, you know, it's not a listener-friendly album.
Yeah.
You can respect it as a great piece of art.
And we said at the start of all this that All Things Must Pass is a great album for people who don't like the Beatles. And, you know, the question I've never been able to figure out about Plastic Ono Band is, can you enjoy it if you don't know who John Lennon is? You know, if you're not buying into some of that story, you know, that's an important part of listening to that record.
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think that's incredibly insightful. Whereas if you're not invested in Lennon the story, or Lennon the man, Lennon the character, those songs don't resonate. Paul, you know, has Paul produced an album as good as that? I mean, I don't think he produced anything as good as that until he gets to Band
I mean,
on the
it's
Run.
apples and oranges. Paul is not going to write a song like "Hear Me, Lord." He's just not. That's not in his wheelhouse. But it's not why he's Paul. So and that's why George is George.
I think the first album that Paul does that comes close to it is Band on the Run. I think that's the contender. From later in, it's so hard because you're so far removed in years and in sound and production styles and all that has gone before, and everyone, their muse starts to kind of slip away or go in different directions. So I think it's hard. The Ringo's album from 1973, I love that album.
Well, let's just kind of touch upon one or two more things then before we wrap it up, because you talk about things kind of fading away, and I guess in terms of George's follow-up or what he did next, because we know that he spends pretty much all of 1971 sorting out the concert for Bangladesh, and you think of alternate histories, like if he had pulled together a version of his 74 tour in 71 that was a bit like the concert for Bangladesh and took that across North America, could that have sealed the deal a bit more? There
was a huge kind of stratospheric launch of his solo career. And you kind of touched on it in the previous episode about this being all pervasive. This My Sweet Lord is everywhere, but that also elevated George. And there's, I think it's John Harris maybe talks about, he was the most powerful man in rock music by the time that 1973 came along, because he immediately went into Bangladesh, which was seen as this great sort of innovative move and very philanthropic, and so he's coming off the back of that, and then the next thing is Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth, which is a number one
big hit,
US single. So 73, but Living in the Material World is sort of All Things Must Pass light. But I think you're right. I think if he had the sort of willingness or the ambition, and I think that's probably the key word, is ambition. If he'd had the ambition to build on that.
But and it's not that he wasn't ambitious, but I think he thought ambition wasn't a virtue or wasn't necessary.
Yes, I think
that's
he
fine.
doesn't. Yes, and again, that's another big distinction between himself and Paul. You don't have a sense that George is kind of chasing hits and and doesn't want to do that, and he kind of has been through all of that, and he's satisfied, I think, his ambitions with All Things Must Pass and Concert for Bangladesh, and then after that, everything is on a lower scale. He then tries to do something sort of noble, I suppose, in his eyes, with the 74 tour about introducing Indian music, and it's a precipitous fall from grace. He was so high, riding so high in 1973, and then it just collapses in 74.
So finally, what do you think is the album's legacy? How do you... I mean, it has a certain immediate legacy, I think, in the 70s. Where do you see it today?
It's funny because it's the acoustic songs that I think provide its lasting legacy. I mean, someone wrote saying, Elliott Smith wouldn't have had a career but for the acoustic All Things Must Pass. You get people like Sean Mullen doing cover versions. You get, when they have George Fest, you suddenly have, Weird Al, Conan O'Brien, all your favorites turn up. It does seem to have that kind of resonance with the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that.
Yeah, there's kind of in the last 10 years, there's kind of been a new acoustic kind of thing. So I'm thinking of groups like Fleet Foxes who kind of have
it kind of that is exactly, you think of songs like I'd Have You Anytime and Frankie Crisp and those it feeds into that, and it's again, Here Comes the Sun, Spotify, all that, it feeds into that.
And you talk about George Fest, which is an interesting counterpoint to the Concert for George, because it's a different group of musicians, and it's got Britt Daniel from Spoon, who are a band I love. He does a great I Me Mine, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see that kind of group of mainly LA-based musicians taking this kind of this very curious English hymnal religious music and filtering through their own work. It's very, very good.
And what I would say about George Fest is it's fun. Everybody is having fun,
So I think we have talked a lot about All Things Must Pass. This is.
But have we said enough?
There's so much to say. You certainly, we certainly have. You probably could have either listened to All Things Must Pass in less time than it's taken for us to talk about All Things Must Pass.
Yeah, easily.
But such is the way. It's an album that's 50 years old. It's worthy of all the accolade. It's worthy of all this discussion and time. And it's good to know that in 2021 we're going to be looking at some kind of massed redo of the whole thing.
Redo of it, and what people will be looking forward to most of all is All Things Must Pass episodes 4, 5, and 6 as we review the box set.
Yeah, well, maybe they could put this podcast inside the box set. Wouldn't that be nice?
Put a download link to this podcast.
That'd be great. But what do you think, everybody? We say it all the time on this show. You know, our main goal is to send you running back to your record or CD shelves or whatnot and having another listen. And we hopefully, having gone through All Things Must Pass with a bit of a fine-tooth comb, you'll feel compelled to do the same. But do let us know what you think. We're available in all the usual places. We're on Twitter @BeatlesPod. We have the private Facebook group, Ask Stephen, and he will let you in and you can chat away to all the other like-minded souls there. And thank you for all your subscriptions and downloads. And if ever you feel like leaving a nice review, every single one of them, we see them and they're appreciated. Thank you very much. But for now, I'm Jason Carty.
I'm Stephen Cockcroft.
And this has been a very long Nothing Is Real. We'll see you next time.
Nothing Is Real is powered by Acast.